Hello, everyone. My name is Karan Campbell, Program Manager at the National Fund for Workforce Solutions. Thank you for taking time out today to join us as we highlight the National Fund's groundbreaking project on career navigation. With support from Walmart, the National Fund led a comprehensive research project to explore the career navigation landscape across the country in cities such as Birmingham, Boston, Chicago, Milwaukee, and San Francisco. During today's session, we'll be providing an overview of the National Fund's approach to our research. We will also be discussing why this research matters to the workforce development field and the implications for the National Fund strategy moving forward. And to wrap up our time together, we'll be having a discussion with our host sites regarding the impact of this work in their respective cities and why it's so important. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared with registrants following the event. To start our time together, we'd like to showcase a video from our Career Navigation mini documentary series featuring young workers in Chicago.
These last $2, I'm not gonna lose. These last $2, I'm not gonna lose. One for the bus fare, other for the jukebox. Hit me some down home blues. Gotta hear me some down home blues. Oh yeah, Johnny Taylor. Last $2.
My name is Julie Hernandez. I'm the youth organizer at the Northwest Center, where although you're an organizer. Yeah. I've lived in Belmont creating my entire life as a nonprofit. I work out of in Belmont creating. We've been around since 2003, but I started working with them when I was 14.
My name is Denala. I'm currently a senior at the University of Illinois Chicago, majoring in psychology with a minor in human resource management. And a little bit about myself. I recently just finished NE, which is a first generation college student program that helps start the career navigation.
I worked at FedEx for about a year, but then working at FedEx made me realize that working at FedEx wasn't something that I was passionate about, and I missed the work that I used to do when I was in high school. So I decided to just look for an opportunity. Fortunately enough for me, there was an opportunity open. And for about a year now, I've been the youth organizer. As that, prior to that, I worked as a student leader for about 4 years.
I feel like college was more so destined for me because I didn't see it for myself, but I went to Marshall, which is a school in a really bad area, and everybody, like the teachers, be like, "Oh, you just like a white girl trapped in a black girl body, so like you don't relate to none of the people there." So just always hearing that, I was okay, so I just have to fit into this thing that was created for me. So that's why I just kept pushing, like, oh, well, let me just live in this idea that they fit for me. First 2 semesters, I didn't like pass a couple of classes, so I ended up having to reach out to like a lot of programs on campus. Like, even if it's just like funding, like financial, because I did have to work. I was working full time still. Full time, like almost like part time, close to full time in my first 2 years. And I was just like, I can't. Like, I already didn't know how to navigate. I didn't have time management. I was just like all of this.
I think what changed for me was when I had COVID and I was stuck in my room and everything's eating you up. There's nothing, you've already watched everything on Netflix, you've already played all the video games, and you're just like, what do I do? And you're just stuck thinking. And you're like, okay, I told myself my goal was to either go back and work at the nonprofit or go to school.
So I'm just saying, like, you have to hit like rock bottom before you can work your way up. And I felt like that's where I was at when I constantly kept failing these classes. And I was just like, it can't be the school, it can't be everybody else, it has to be me. So I just had to internally like look at myself, and that's when I joined the American EDU program and I got a mentor.
Who were you talking to? Or did you get mentors? Yeah. At the time, a big mentor would be Julio Rodriguez. He worked at the nonprofit. I can't remember what his position was at the time. And then the youth organizer, Jeremy Cuevas. Jeremy Cuevas, for me, became a role model. at the time when I was in high school, whatever question I had, whatever I was feeling, he would always just guide me, give me advice, and honestly, I'm really grateful that I had people like them.
Any other barriers, like
I feel like at this point now it's mental barriers, just feeling that sense of like imposter syndrome, like just feel like I don't like, oh no, like it just don't feel right, and I feel like that's my barrier right now with myself. I wish I had more family support. Like I get that they couldn't understand, but it felt like I was just not like. It honestly felt like I was living in a whole other city just by myself. Like I was just navigating this whole world by myself. And when I would reach out to them, it's just like, "Oh, you got it." Like, okay, what that mean?
Good afternoon, everyone. Every time I watch the many documentaries that we created, I just feel such a sense of gratitude for everyone who shared their stories with us, and happy to share them with you all too. I'm Michelle Rafferty, Chief Program Officer at the National Fund. So excited that so many people have joined us today. I know we have some familiar faces that have joined us, as well as some new ones. So I want to start just by telling you a little bit about the National Fund. The National Fund for Workforce Solutions seeks to advance race equity in the workforce. That is our North Star. And we do this in partnership with a network of over 30 regional workforce collaboratives. And those collaboratives engage a wide range of local stakeholders. That includes workforce development boards and economic development agencies, local funders, training institutions, industry partnerships and employers, and other partners. And we support them and work with them to change the systems that are holding inequity in place at the regional level. Next slide. Before we jump into our career navigation project, I can't help but stop and pause and invite you to join us this fall at Shift, which is our biannual convening. And we'll be talking more about career navigation, many other pressing issues. My colleague is going to share a link to the registration page where you can find out more. Everyone who's cool is going to be there, so please sign up. Next slide. I want to start by just taking a step back and giving you all a sense of what drove us to do this career navigation project. Because we're focused on advancing race equity in the workforce, we need to, by definition, close racial gaps in employment rates, income, and wealth. The only way for this to happen is for someone's access to jobs and career pathways to not be determined by race or other identities. Unfortunately, in the US, occupational segregation plagues our labor market. We see that people of color and women are crowded in low quality jobs, while their white counterparts are overrepresented in those jobs that pay more and offer more advancement opportunity. This pattern is not the result of inherent individual preferences. In fact, it's by design. Occupational segregation was created by and continues to be held in place by hundreds of years of public policy. And today it's reinforced by unequal access to educational attainment and resources, as well as explicit and implicit biased behaviors and practices. Next slide, please. So what can we in the workforce development field do to disrupt the drivers of occupational segregation? It's that question that really drove us to embark on this project with support from Walmart. We've spent over the past year learning and thinking about career navigation. And we've done that by drawing from a comprehensive literature review, applied research that we led with employers, funders, and practitioners from our network, as well as original research that we'll be diving in more today with dozens of workers. The headline is that our country lacks a cohesive career navigation system, and the services that do exist, they're underfunded and fragmented. I want to pause and just say, when I use the term career navigation, sometimes in our field that refers to a type of service or a program, and it's much more than that. It's all the personal decisions and actions and systems that influence a person's career journey. Next slide, please. In November, we co-published a paper with the Project on Workforce at Harvard, Unlocking Economic Prosperity. The paper reviews the state of career navigation across the country and includes many recommendations for a variety of workforce stakeholders. In the paper, we also identified several drivers of career navigation success, and you can see those listed here. I would say with our focus on race equity in the workforce, we see social structures and ecosystems as underpinning all of the drivers. You really can't separate and pull them apart. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so we knew from the beginning that we wanted to interview workers and create journey maps that would illustrate their journey. Part of advancing equity has to really involve a shift in power, and that sometimes starts with just centering the voices and experiences and assets of workers. We also know that available data, especially after doing the literature review, doesn't tell the whole story, and oftentimes it leaves out the experiences of people of color and other people who face inequity. So we wanted to really go beyond the academic and policy research and listen deeply to workers' stories. We were guided by a few key questions. We really just wanted to understand, how do workers in these occupations learn about, prepare for, and connect to employment? And being, at the National Fund, we wanted to understand how do workforce systems, training institutions, employers, and other systems what role do they play in shaping a worker's journey? And of course, what can these stakeholders do? What strategies might emerge that will shed light on new approaches that these stakeholders can do to disrupt occupational segregation and advance equity? Go to the next slide. So overwhelmingly, when it comes to the driver of information access and accuracy, all the workers that we interviewed really struggled to get access to accurate information. It was largely determined by the social systems around them. And it was difficult to navigate, to make sense of what career opportunities might exist. And as Devin says, how to get there. Next slide. We also found that for some people, it really wasn't much of a choice. The theoretical framework for career navigation, and Michelle's going to talk more about this in a bit, the idea in theory would be that someone begins their career journey by assessing their own skills and interests and exploring career options to find a good fit and then pursuing that goal. For a lot of the workers we interviewed, these steps just did not exist, or they were significantly limited. One example is the domestic workers that we interviewed in the Bay Area they all came to the US for better opportunity. And from the beginning, their choices were really limited. And a lot of times they were guided by their own social networks and the jobs and connections that those social networks offered. Next slide. So we know in the workforce development field that building skills and obtaining credentials is not a cure-all for inequity. We know it's not sufficient, but at the same time, what we learned both in the paper as well as in our worker research is that building skills and accessing post-secondary education and training, achieving credentials could make a difference. It could definitely pay off. Most of the people that we talked to either had completed training or had ambitions to attend training, and they had ambition to go above and beyond and to find a career pathway that would be both fulfilling as well as enable them to take care of their families. They were passionate about what they did and took pride in their jobs. Next slide. We also found that those people that did go into training, especially longer programs where it was a degree program or a post-secondary credential at a community college, that it was hard. It was very hard to complete training. Most people had to take breaks and had to stop out. And that was for a variety of reasons. There were just practical financial constraints. Taking time away from working, you're losing income, and you don't have access to additional supports that you need to still meet your basic needs while you're in training. We also saw that some workers struggled with a lack of confidence. They felt out of place, and some felt unprepared for the types of courses and programs that they were enrolling in. Next slide. We really can't say enough about the impact of social capital on career navigation outcomes. It's huge. So from the time the workers that we interviewed and we learned about how they got to the job that they were in, there are a lot of stories that really dated back to their childhood. And their social networks determined what types of jobs and careers they were exposed to, that they saw were possible for them. And the social capital, their social networks and relationships determine what doors were open and what doors were closed. We also found that the people that were able to achieve a career goal that they had for themselves, whether it be completing training or going after a better job, all of them had someone in their corner that was a positive influence. It was someone who believed in them, helped them believe in themselves, who helped them keep going, even though all the structural barriers were continuing to get in their way. And this could be a friend or family. We had some people talk about a supportive worksite supervisor or college advisor or some other person in the workforce field. Next slide, please. And the importance of social capital really extended across all occupations and all geographies. So when we think about this domestic workers in the Bay Area, their opportunities for additional work were also dependent on their social networks and getting referrals from their customers. Next slide. So when it comes to wraparound resources and supports, there's no doubt that for people to be successful in completing a training program, to connecting to employment, staying in employment, that getting help with transportation, childcare, and basic needs can really make the difference of whether or not they're able to succeed. But unfortunately, those types of supports, they are hard to come by. They're underfunded, and in many cases, they're limited in the number of people that can be helped. And ultimately, it's really a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid on broken systems. We know, all of us know, that the rising cost of childcare and other dependent care, in some communities, transportation, across the board, healthcare and housing, that all of the systems that are driving those costs make it so difficult for people to get ahead. That came up time and time again, and it cut across all racial identities. Next slide, please. So I want to invite us to take a step back here for a moment. We want people, regardless of their race and other identities, to have access to the accurate information. We want them to have access to skills, training, and education, and all the resources that they need to find and learn about and pursue careers that are meaningful to them and help them take care of their families. That's what we want. At the same time, though, we want all workers to feel this. We talked to people who were holding lower paying jobs that were passionate about the work that they did. They were passionate about being in the healthcare, having a healthcare support role where they were helping other people. And it was difficult for them to come to the realization that they either had to take on a second job just to make ends meet, or that they were going to have to leave that job and pursue a different field or advanced training to make more money. They also struggled with, in addition to lower wages and the financial challenges that came with that, unpredictable and demanding work schedules. One thing we haven't touched on yet either in terms of the drivers of career navigation success is the discrimination that many people face. And that could have been in the workforce system, post-secondary education institutions in terms of what types of programs workers were guided into. And it certainly applies to the workplace. And that's something that the driver framework doesn't fully capture, that discrimination on top of systemic barriers really can limit someone's ability to experience economic mobility. So I would say, in conclusion, that this research really raised more questions than answers. There are a lot of things that we believed and had a hunch to be true, and the research we did certainly reinforced how important it is to think about systems and to think about job quality and to think about what people really need to advance. But there were so much uniqueness across all these different stories. Every person's situation was so complex, and it really changed. It changed based on whether or not their family members were doing well. They may have changed their dreams or ambitions. So it's really nearly impossible to come up with one set of conclusions about what needs to change. So what we hope is that these journey maps and these mini documentaries will seed many conversations at the National Fund, across our network, and elsewhere. We see them as a beginning point for conversation, a place where you can dig deeper. And I would like to turn it over now to my colleague, Michelle Wilson, who's going to talk more about the approach that we took in creating this research. Michelle, you're on mute.
Oh, I just did my whole spiel and I did it.
I was like, where is she?
She is. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Michelle Wilson. I'm the Director of Evaluation and Learning at the National Fund, and I'm super happy to be here with you today. I'm going to pick up where Michelle left off and continue doing some more framing around our career nav work. As she mentioned, we spent most of last summer traveling to our sites, interviewing workers around their career navigation journeys, and geography was top of mind for us as well, too. We have a rich network at the National Fund, over 30 collaboratives. We wanted to make sure that we had the right geographical framing for the conversations we wanted to have with folks. So we went in partnership with our sites and discussed what made the most sense in determining what stories we needed to lift up. And as you can see, we landed in the Bay Area talking to domestic workers. We went to Milwaukee to talk to Black construction workers. We were in Boston talking to healthcare support workers. We really wanted to focus on young Black IT workers, so we went to Birmingham. We wanted to understand how folks in the career the child care field navigated their career. So we went to Chicago and talked to child care workers, but we were also interested in understanding the journeys of workers and learners, young workers and learners. So we did that in Chicago as well too, and then we also went to Wichita, because we really wanted to lift up some of the stories in Wichita. As a matter of fact, when we started this project and talking to Amanda Duncan, who you'll hear from later on, they just had a series of layoffs in Wichita. And so we wanted to explore that, and we had an opportunity to dig into that. So that's where we went, and that's how we landed. Next slide. Part of this work, Michelle did a great job of pulling some of the quotes in terms of how people were experiencing, or some of the experiences that they were having around their career navigation journeys, and those are good, and not a lot of. I mean, we've all heard those. We wanted to go a layer deeper, and we'll talk later with Donna Wharton Fields about how journey maps allow us to do that. But we wanted to go a layer deeper to build out or broaden our understanding of career navigation in a way that would create space in our thinking to design fuller solutions or strategies that support workers and learners in a more robust way. And as we started looking at the stages of career navigation early on in our lit review work, it was just really obvious that how people navigate their careers, looking at the stages that were mapped out through the literature, is not a linear process, and it's not a one-size-fits-all model. So it became even more important to understand the nuances in the stories in a way that we could think differently about how we design solutions. Next slide. A little bit about the demographics of the folks that we talked to. So we interviewed 28 folks. You see here that we had some, you see the gender and racial diversity of our group, and the median age was 28.9. I'm just sliding, I'm trying to move my screen over. We had a good mix of folks that we interviewed here. So that's the demographics of the folks that we interviewed. Next slide. And this is what the journey maps look like. And so I just want to pause here and say, you know, at the conclusion of this webinar, all of these journey maps and the mini docs, the full mini docs will be available. And so we invite you to take a look at those and dig into them. But we design these journey maps, and they are really jam-packed with a lot of information. And that is by design, because we really wanted to try and lift up the fullness of a person's life in a way that we can hold these stories in our heads as we think about designing solutions, again, to design fuller solutions for folks. And so these journey maps, I just want to point out the structure of them. We have obviously the demographic information and background, and we have quotes for folks. This is all primary data that we've used to develop these journey maps. And then in the center, you really see how career navigation is not a linear process, right? And in that space, we look at timeframes of how the time people are spending in a space, and pain points and things like that. And so that was really important. You see how folks bounce back and forth. But, you know, one of the things that you think about is just like, oh, wait a minute, if I start in self-exploration or self-assessment and I go to career exploration, what pings me back to self-assessment, right? And then where do we fit in developing solutions? What shifts can we make to support those kinds of transitions, right? So this is one of the ways that you can look at these maps and think and dig into the work. And then, of course, there's how people actually experience the maps, which is on the far right of the journey maps. And you can see the little bar below about how they were feeling during these various experiences. So as I said, there's lots of information, lots of content here. That is by design. The journey maps come with discussion guides. So we really want folks to dig in and have some meaningful dialogue, and hopefully it will be generative for thinking about equitable solutions. We will now move into, that's the framing of that. I want to invite you as we move through the rest of this conversation to drop your questions in the chat. If we have time, I think we'll get to them. If not, we'll try and follow up in some format or another to respond to the questions that are showing up. And again, we invite you at the close of this webinar to go to our website, and you'll have access to all the videos and all of the journey maps. Right. So right now we're going to move to, and so the journey map that we have here is actually of domestic workers in California in the Bay Area. And so the video that we are going to watch, the next video clip that we're going to watch is domestic workers in the Bay Area. Look at that.
Bueno, yo, saben, me llamo Marta Herrera, soy mexicana. Soy nacida en México, emigré a los Estados Unidos desde 1998, llegando a Atlanta, Georgia, y de allá me vine para aquí, San Francisco. Soy trabajadora del hogar, yo limpio casas, pero ya tengo 8 años o 9 años que cuido niños. Ahora sí que es mi profesión, cuidar niños. Para mí, cuidar niños me ha llenado mucho. Me ha hecho más fuerte, confortable. Soy Berta Villalobos, yo nací en la ciudad, bueno, nací en Uruapan, Michoacán, y me crecí en México DF, y pues ahí tuve 3 hijos en la Ciudad de México. Siempre me dediqué al hogar allá y decidí venir a Estados Unidos. Mi ilusión era conocer a mi papá. Ahí empezó lo doloroso para mí, porque tuve que dejar a mis 3 hijos en México. O sea, el conocer a mi papá me costó mucho. Tengo una hija y emigramos a los Estados Unidos. Yo a mi hija me la traje de 9 años. Aquí estudió hasta la high school ella. Ella se embarazó, tuvo su niña, pero a ella le dio leucemia y falleció. Ella falleció, fue mi única hija y ella falleció. Aunque ella ya no está, creo que las niñas me vinieron a dar una alegría. No está conmigo ella, sino cuando yo llegué aquí yo venía muy mal. Y aquí me apoyaron. Desde que yo entré a esa puerta yo sentí un alivio, porque todas las personas que están aquí me recibieron con mucho cariño, con mucha comprensión. Desde la pandemia yo tenía 11 casas para mí solita. Y yo estaba muy bien limpiando mis casas. También cuidaba niños. por las tardes. Y pues con la pandemia todo eso se me terminó. Perdí todas las casas, como quien dice, y las únicas que me regresaron fueron estas dos. Y ahí sigo, gracias a Dios. Mis patronas son muy buenas personas. Siento como que las patronas que agarro nuevas nada más son como temporarias, como unos 2, 3 meses y ya para el trabajo, ya no ya no me vuelven a. Pues cuando yo estoy yendo a limpiar, pues tengo la ilusión de que ese trabajo se quede fijo, porque pues yo lo necesito. Y voy contenta.
As you can see, I mean, these videos, hi, Michelle. Oh, you're coming on for the conversation. You're doing what you're supposed to do. So these videos, really grateful to our collaboratives for joining us and connecting us with folks to have these conversations. We don't take for granted our ability to engage in the community the way that we're able to. So we're really grateful for that. So we want to move into our next discussion. Michelle Rafferty is on screen. I don't know if everybody else is on screen, but if everybody wants to pop up for our next panel discussion, it's what's our why and why does it matter? And I'm super excited about having these brilliant brains to do this next portion of the conversation. So we have joining us Iris Palmer, who's the director at New America. We have Michael Schultz, who's a researcher at NORC at the University of Chicago. And of course, we have our own chief programs officer at the National Fund, Michelle Rafferty. And so just again, want to have a conversation around the work, how we use it. When we went into this process, we wanted to design something for the field in a way that we can engage again in a broader way around career navigation. And so this work, it was intended to expand our collective thinking around career navigation, allowing us more creative and intentional content and designing equitable solutions. So we've invited everyone to have a conversation. I'm gonna start with you, Iris, because you're deep in the community college. I mean, that's your specialty. You're deep in the community college world. You do a lot of research. And I reached out to you and I was like, hey, Iris, can you have a conversation and chat with us about this work? So I want to start by asking you, what do you see in the career navigation? What challenges do you see in the career navigation system? And how do you see the work here that we're doing amplifying what's working or the gap identification in the career navigation system? We'll start with you, and Michael and Michelle jump in as you see fit.
Michelle, thank you so much for inviting me. First of all, I want to say that it's a huge benefit to the field to be able to have the voices of career navigators, or people who are actually navigating their own careers in the space. I think, speaking from my perspective, working with community colleges, I think it's very easy for us to get blinded to what it's actually like to be a user of the services of community colleges. And we say we help people navigate their careers, but there are clearly some really significant gaps. And I think you've highlighted them really nicely with both the career maps and the videos here. A couple of things that sort of stood out to me was there was some exploration in education in high school, more of that sort of career exploration in high school than I was expecting. More from in Birmingham and Chicago in particular, we heard a lot about how those workers had experimented in high school. They had been in college and sort of been able to shift between programs of study and do some work-based learning to experience the careers they were thinking about, and then actually change based on what seemed to be working for them and what didn't seem to be working for them. So I thought that was really interesting. We do a lot of work with work-based learning and also high school career exploration, and I thought it was really interesting to hear that come out with this group of interviewees. And then the other thing I thought was really interesting was with the more contingent workforce, so the people who were domestic workers in San Francisco and the people who were construction workers in Milwaukee, their goal was really to be business owners, to be small business owners. And the amount of barriers that were being put up in their way as they were trying to start their own businesses was just very daunting. And obviously, as somebody who works in more of the credential space, I thought it was fascinating to hear them also struggling with navigating what is an insanely complex level of certifications and licensure, particularly around the construction trades, which is not all connected to colleges, of course, but is really hard to navigate. And it certainly reflects my own experience with my family and people I know who want to change careers, they want to do something different, and the sort of how to do that, what types of education they need and what types of credentials they need to make that shift is not clear. And I do it for a living, and I still have a really hard time helping them navigate it. So I just wanted to say thank you for the addition to this space and from really bringing it from a really authentic place rather than us looking at it from 10,000 feet, understanding how that intersects with people on the ground.
Right. Yeah. So thank you for that. I mean, I think that I don't know if Michelle or Michael, if you have any response to or any comment to what Iris is saying or thoughts.
I just jump in on the youth employment experiences piece. I think one of the underappreciated things that happened in the aftermath of the Great Recession and the very long, slow recovery, back to full employment, which we just achieved recently before the pandemic started, is how that affected the youth labor market and really led to less opportunities for those early learning experiences and how pivotal those can be for folks to start to learn the set of experiences that are skills, but they're also just how you work with employers and what kind of interests you have. And sometimes I think like that's an understudied piece of the puzzle here, because it happens at the same time as education happens, right? And we tend to focus on those contexts, but I think the work context and who has access to those jobs can be really important part of this longer story of occupational segregation over the life course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Iris, I like that you picked up on in some of the communities there was career exposure that happened, whether it be through their school or through their family. And I think it's important just to note that this qualitative research that we did is meant to add more depth to stories. It's not meant for us to like make any conclusions, because some of the communities we went to, just to be really clear, we were finding workers based on their connection to our collaboratives on the ground. So they may have already been connected to a program. So there's so much we can learn from the maps. And at the same time, I'm wondering, for all the people we didn't reach, like what would their stories have looked like, which could feel pretty overwhelming. But for sure, like when we did our scan with workforce practitioners, I think most of us in this field recognize that career exploration, if it exists anywhere, it's going to be the most robust in high school, middle school, and maybe in community college. Like once you get out into the world, it is so much harder to find information, regardless of across the board, but especially if you are someone who's facing structural barriers.
So Michelle, so it sounds like you're suggesting that, I mean, looking at where it's most robust, that there needs to be energy in career exploration in the self-assessment phase for folks outside of that space. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, I am absolutely biased because I've spent most of my career working with adults through the workforce development system. And that's been something I've lamented for a long time, that people come in, to our programs, and despite our best intentions, we tend to funnel them into this limited set of options. We sometimes don't even have the time, the funding, or the performance measures that really motivate us to think about this from their perspective. It's just, we're not set up that way.
Right. All right. So I want to move into our next question. So Michael, I want to start with you on this. So when you're thinking about the workforce ecosystem, how might, like, particularly employers, talked a little bit about community colleges, Iris, but workforce practitioners and philanthropy, I'm curious about how you see the use of these maps within these particular spaces as generative tools.
Yeah, thank you. I want to start off also by just acknowledging the privilege to be here and to hear these stories. I think qualitative work really does ground us. I know, since I'm not part of this research, I think I can say like there's tremendous amount of effort that went into collecting these stories. And as primarily a quantitative researcher myself, I think when we approach quantitative data, we should always approach it with understanding that these are people's stories too. And especially when you can see those when you have longitudinal data on people's careers and economic mobility, which is the focus of my own research. So to this question about the ecosystem and how these journey maps, I think, can fit into that, I just have a couple of things I wanted to bring up. First, I think there is a focus on early young adults. We know that the first 10 years in the labor market is when most people experience their wage gains. We also have a fairly open general education system in the United States. And that means that on the job experiences are really important in those early years, especially for folks without college degrees. And that lead to more traditional professional paths that are more closed to others. So people change jobs, they change employers. And sometimes we think about careers as tied to employers or tied to very specific training. And I think starting to understand, we look at these maps, how people change jobs, they experience difficulties with their jobs, but also with their households, with other events that affect their lives. So kind of a second point there would be when you're thinking about structural inequality, there's an aspect there about who is at risk for which kinds of disruptions in their life and who has the resources to manage those, and how all those things that happen around people's lives, not just affect their work. And I think that that's part of a larger, understanding how people end up in different places, who has the opportunity and can take the risk for different kinds of job transitions becomes important. The last thing I wanted to say is that I think it's kind of implicit in the research design, but I think it's really driving home is that, we tend to talk about intersectional inequality and focus on traditionally gender and race, but I think there's a strong focus here on place, right? These are different places. They have different labor markets. They have different jobs. They have different opportunities. And so if we want to study job pathways and careers, we need to have a place-based approach. I'm sure it's preaching to the choir to this audience, but I just want to hammer that home. And the other thing I think is there's an element that we might call class, right? About which resources you have in your family, in your household, also where you start on which job ladders are available to you or within easy reach, but also culture. So I think in some of the other interviews, to pull from like Elijah Anderson's more recent book on Black and white space, what does it mean for workers to move into occupations or jobs or employers where things are a little bit different, and people might be tokenized or asked to do a lot of DREI work, for their organization. There's research that's been done on that, and I think these are just kind of another layer, different level of barrier that people experience when you're thinking about occupational segregation and why people stay in or take different opportunities. So a whole bunch of things there. But I think it all is really fruitful from this really rich research.
No, I mean, you make a great point about place. I mean, I think one of the conversations that we had multiple times during our field work is, I don't know if we are in service of this work. We are out in the world doing the good of workforce development, but I think sometimes it escapes us. Like the place, I mean, we know it, but then to see it and experience and how people engage and how they respond to various things is like holding that information is really powerful. And so I appreciate your point on that. I'm just going to check. I said chat, but I've been told by one of our producers that it's the Q&A. So if you have questions, pop them in the Q&A. I'm just going to look at the Q&A for a second and see here. I'm going to come back to that, but I'm going to ping to Michelle Rafferty, our Chief Programs Officer, and then ask like the question. So what does that mean for us at the National Fund and moving forward and how we embed this and how we move the work forward? This is, your big, beautiful brain is fantastic. So
It's a $1,000,000 question.
Go.
Well, as I said at the conclusion of my portion of the presentation, really meant it that there are a lot of questions raised by this research. I mean, there is, trying to synthesize it was nearly impossible. It's more about just pulling out different parts of the story, different things that we can learn. So I would say, first and foremost, we are still thinking through what this means. I wouldn't want to pretend that we have all the answers. But what I will say is that we started this research with a clear point of view. And I would say, that we definitely, the stories that we heard really reinforced how important it is that the National Fund and our partners continue to really focus on systems change. We had already started to move away from, just focusing solely on training and education. There's been a lot of data that when you disaggregate it, you can see that, yeah, like sometimes educational attainment, usually it makes a difference in people's well-being, but by itself, it's not going to alleviate racial inequity. We have to look beyond education and training. We have to look at behaviors and practices that are discriminatory. We have to look at, the structures and systems that really keep people from accessing the basic fundamental supports that they need to be able to go to work, to be able to go to training. And that came through loud and clear from our interviews. So some of we've been in a journey at the National Fund as we've been focusing more on advancing race equity and launching new efforts. So this past year, we've launched a project to really address the childcare system, and we're coming at it, looking at how improving job quality can hopefully also increase access to more affordable childcare. It's just fundamental. People don't have access to childcare. That all the training in the world you give people is not going to make a difference. We've also been, continuing to do important work around job quality. And in fact, the paper that we shared today, there was a set of recommendations around how to make just career navigation within a workplace more attainable. Because even there, it becomes, you might get your foot in the door someplace, but it's how you navigate and move up is really not transparent. It's hard to navigate. So there's a lot of work that employers can do within workplaces and in partnership with education and training institutions to open up pathways, both for new workers as well as those who are already employees. And so we're really fortunate to receive support from Walmart to be able to launch a program this year to work with a set of employers to do just that with our collaborative partners to really look at new practices that can be adopted. And there's additional work that we've been doing too. We launched this year around ways that we can disrupt occupational segregation at the community college level. And we are leveraging our relationships with community colleges and industry partnerships to see how they can come together to really look at how do you disrupt patterns of occupational segregation. And that could mean like who finds out about what opportunities, how they're learning about programs, how they are advised on what their options are, and whether or not they're supported adequately. And finally, like whether or not they're connected to a quality job where they're going to be in an environment, to Michael's earlier point, be in an environment that's supportive to their success. So there's a lot that we're already doing that these maps are helping to inform, and will continue to at the local level inform the specific practices that people are exploring. And then I feel like there's just like a whole additional world that exists where we need to think about what it would mean to create a true regional coordinated career navigation system. I mean, that would require, significant resources, but really exploring what does that mean to recognize that, as both of the other panelists said, people are experiencing their life and they're interfacing with lots of different systems. They're changing jobs. We're just not currently set up to support people's journeys. And we need to figure out how to do a better job just for their sake and for the sake of our communities and the businesses within them.
Right. So thank you for that. So I'm also monitoring. I think we have time we have some questions in the chat, but one question I have here, the bottom one here is like, what is the right local organization to work with as you move forward with improving career navigation at the local level? And I think Raf and both of you and Iris could probably speak to that, us, the National Fund, because we are in over 30 communities, and Iris, you guys do this work on the ground all the time. So if you both want to spend 30 seconds responding to that.
Michelle, go ahead.
Well, I mean, you're going to know my answer. I feel like I paid this person to ask this question. But our theory of change, we really believe that workforce development so much happens and decided at the regional level. And you have to collaborate. You have to work across institutions, across employers. You have to think really collaboratively to address systemic change. So, I mean, I'm obviously biased, but I believe that the collaborative model is really critical, and having that local lens is really important.
And I mean, you're going to know my answer too, but they don't always do a great job. But I do think community colleges can play a role in this, particularly when they've sort of been redesigned in a pathways construct. So you've sort of can bring people in, help them think about what they want to do next, and get them connected to the correct program to do that. And it is something that they need to improve on, particularly with career services just in general at community colleges and how those connect to CTE programs, or if somebody does want to transfer to a 4-year degree. I mean, there's a lot of navigation to be done. And they're very complex institutions, to be honest with you. But I do think that we could build up that role, and it's something we're really working on here at New America. And Michelle, your point about working with community colleges on occupational segregation, would love to co-write something with you on that, because our colleges, we're constantly talking to them about it, and they really struggle with being able to recruit students who are different than the population they're serving right now into these programs and help them be successful. It's actually a huge challenge. And they say, oh, well, the student doesn't want it. And it's like, well, you need to talk to them better about that.
More
and
complex.
what the job quality is on the other side. And we do talk to colleges about programs that they don't have anymore because the job quality was so poor. But I think getting more information like that out to the field about what best practices are in that space is something that would go a long way to making this stronger.
Fantastic. Okay, so I want to thank our panelists. That was a great discussion. I appreciate you, Deep, Iris, Michelle, Michael. I'll have you guys hop off. We're going to move into our third video clip. This is focused on young Black IT workers in Birmingham, and we'll come back for our second panel. Hang tight.
My name's Jared Sisher. I'm from Birmingham. Went to John Carroll, it's over on Lakeshore Drive, Catholic High School. I went to school at the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa. I had done interviews with Oncentive, which is where I currently work at now. And Oncentive is a HR fintech startup.
So my name is Justice Alexis. I am from Atlanta. I moved to Birmingham in 2012 to go to Miles College. There, that's where at first I was studying. I was studying chemistry with a minor in biology. So I wanted to be a doctor. I just knew I was going to be a doctor. I had a tragedy happen. I got robbed at gunpoint at work. And I was like, you know what, this happened in Birmingham, I'm going back. So I went back, and that's when I ended up getting my degree at Miles, which is in computer information science with a concentration in cybersecurity. So I currently work at a bank, and it's a rotational program, and I'm in risk management. Yeah, that's that. It's not where I want to be.
Okay, so job options. Job options are on here. Okay, so it was Sinclair, Ram Tool.
Yes.
And I chose Ram Tool over Sinclair. I ended up leaving after 2 weeks. I didn't know that at first I didn't even interview with the guy that was trying to get me into sales. He was there, head of sales, and I thought it was pretty nice, but I wasn't really sure where it would go. And I know sales are commission based a lot, and
It's not what you want to do.
No, I don't want to have to be dependent on. I mean, I like to grind, I like to work, but I don't want it to be, with a 1-year-old, my dependent income.
Right.
And so my buddy who I mentioned earlier did the cohort. He was trying to get me to do the cohort as well.
Okay.
But the thing is, you can't have a job while you do it. So I was like, well, how am I supposed to? I have to make a living.
Yeah.
And I have a kid. I can't just not get paid. despite this could potentially catapult my life a lot further, current circumstances wouldn't allow me.
So I think that's been one of the biggest barriers is, am I able to, you know, be a full-time mom and as well be a full-time employer, because I have no, I can work after that. Or, you know, like if I have something to do, it's like, you know, well, just take PTO. And it's like, well, I want to do my work and, you know, I want to finish whatever I'm finishing, you know, and if I have to, I can, but then there's a situation where I have to take PTO all the time now I run out of it and now I'm penalized again so it's kind of like a trap situation with family. I've heard people actually say like, you don't look like a geek. What does that look like, you know? Like, am I supposed to have, you know, like some big glasses and, you know, like, you know, like, what am I supposed to look like? So everybody judges you, you know, like I have been in a job where they're like, you don't fit the pattern. Yeah, and it does make you feel the kind of way. Like,
I get a certification saying that I know how to do it in like a project that went for like a year, but then you're looking at, and I can have everything. I can be a white guy who went to school for it is going to go looked over me who went through a certification or a cohort. I think it's very frustrating. I think that's really the mile marker for not just me, but a lot of people. You know, I'm not just kind of working for myself at this point. Like I have a 2-year-old. Yeah. So, you know, being looked over for these jobs that I can definitely do over someone else that might have less of a skill set than me, but a better connection.
But I do wish that there was like a chapter just for moms. For moms, yeah. I think that's important for me. Like moms in the IT space? Yes, moms in the IT space that are either trying to come into the IT space or that are already there. Just people giving you their antidotes, you know, telling you it's okay and giving you that path.
So again, the full videos will be available immediately after this webinar. And as you can see, I mean, we look at we just enjoyed having conversations with everyone in the field. And I think a couple of the folks we interviewed, I think Jared might be on the call this webinar as well too, but it was it was so great chatting with them and hearing their stories. I'm going to invite into the room another group of rock stars, workforce development rock stars, research rock stars, to continue the conversation around our career nav work. Look at this, look at this group. So we have here Donna Wharton-Fields, she's with MDRC. We have Jerry Roberts from the Milwaukee Area Workforce Funding Alliance. We have Amanda Duncan from the Workforce Alliance in Kansas. We have Kristen Holder for Central 6 Alabama Works. We have Adrian Esquivel from Chicagoland Workforce Funder Alliance, and we have Janelle Coronado from We Work the Bay. Everyone except for Donna are members of our National Fund network and said yes when we said, can we chat about coming to your communities and talking to workers? They said yes. And again, super grateful. We don't take our access to communities across the country for granted. So deeply grateful for everything that they do in workforce and with us. I want to start the conversation with Donna. So when we started this work almost a year ago, we knew we wanted to go into the field and we knew we wanted to tell a different type of story, and journey mapping seemed like a way to do that. We also knew that we needed to ground ourselves more in that methodology to do justice to the work. And so shout out to Weinberg, who supported the TA process for this, for us to engage in a series of thought partnership conversations with MDRC around the work that followed this. So, hi, Donna. So,
hey, how are you?
Good.
Good.
So when we started this and we reached out to you, we've had this conversation before, because it was kind of like, well, we want to do this and we want to know more about this. And so the partnership in that was unique in that this was truly grounded in how our approach, right? Like we were building something, and we were building something, and we needed help thinking about how what what that looked like. And so, Donna, I'm curious for you, like if you want to just tap in and kind of lay the groundwork around journey mapping and why it's important.
Yeah.
And
Sure, I'll say a few words, and I want to start first by thanking you for asking me to join you today. But I think over the course of the last hour or so, I think the collective has made clear the value of mapping, of customer journey mapping. As you and your colleague Michelle both talked about, you approached all of this with quite clear intentionality, openness to discovery of things that you may not have known or had insight into in advance. And so you saw the value of what I would call a very popular human-centered design HCD technique. I think it's a tool that helps teams especially think through complex problems, importantly from the perspective of the people that you're concerned most about, the individuals, the communities who are directly facing or living the problem. So it's a tool. And I think it was our sense that you all already brought what we think is most critical to do HCD well, this particular technique. You already had an HCD mindset, a way of looking at the world, of understanding it. You understood the values undergirding HCD approaches. You already were thinking about the importance of having empathy. You embraced ambiguity. You had all these qualities that we know popular HCD techniques required to do well. So it's not just human-centered design, and in this case, the mapping technique that you need to know and understand. It's more than a process. You have to bring with it the mindset, the outlook, the way of looking at the world, and that intentionality, the goals from the very, very beginning. You were already grounded in that. So talking flexibly about a technique wasn't so hard. There was synergy right away. And what I love most about engaging with you all on this, and this isn't uncommon, but you all were grounded in so much already, that so your understanding of the technique was applied quite flexibly. Let me stop there. I have a lot more to say. I wanted to jump in several times throughout the conversation, unpack some stuff, but let me just stop there.
okay, no, that's great. And so as we continue this conversation, please, it is a conversation, so respond appropriately. So we have some questions, and we want to hear everybody's voice. And so, Donna, we really wanted you in this particular space to react and engage with the folks who were working with us on the ground around this. So for the rest of the crew here, as I mentioned before, we started this journey a little over a year ago, and can you share a little bit about why this matters to your community? And now that you're on the other side of this, your thoughts and reflections about the work or what you're able to uncover and move your work forward on the ground. I don't know who wants to jump in there. Kristen, you said you were super, super excited, so I'm going to ping to you first.
Perfect. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Holder. I'm with Central 6 Alabama Works in the Birmingham region. Glad to be here. So for us, as you saw, we were the last video. Jared is on this webinar. So thanks to Michelle for the call out. And he is one of our young adults that was in the video and also has now become part of our leadership team when it comes to our generation work around young people in tech. So excited to get to see his face up there and the work that we're doing. I'd say that one of the things that why this really matters in our region specifically is the focus on the actual, we talked about occupational segregation in the tech space and how we have a plethora of young adult people of color that are interested in tech or in tech training or looking for tech jobs, but do not have the same access as people of white folks that would be in the same kind of area. And so this is an opportunity to take those kind of stories and really, I love the way you said this, hold those stories that are more than just a data point about their experience, and instead what's beautiful about the journey mapping is that you still add a data points, in this perfect like layering of story and understanding. And so it has given us the opportunity to then take that information and those voices to our employers. And I guess it's kind of like one of the other questions around how we're using it, but it's actually allowing for there to be more honest conversation, because it's not just one person that's having to kind of say, hey, this is who I am by themselves in this meeting with all these employers. It's like, well, now we have this resource that really showcases the whole person that represents a lot of our young people, and now we can speak to that as a whole and respect it as a whole. So that would be, I guess, a little bit of my reflections.
You want to hop in, Jerry? Who wants to hop in next? Jerry?
Yeah, thank you. This is Jerry Roberts from Milwaukee Area Workforce Funding Alliance. One of the things that we've seen now that we're on the other side of this is that we've seen, and we've been trying to approach what we found that has been a disconnect or a mismatch between what we as workforce practitioners have been doing and planning in our programming and the need to engage more in deeper worker voice in order to be able to have real impact. One of the things that we've seen and we noted about this is that for all that we've done, and we've been working at this through a total lens of equity, both around color and around gender, specifically in the construction space, Black and brown people and women, that we have in our market over 80% of construction workers are men. Black people only account for about 6% of construction workers in the city. And we have a history of, racial segregation, and then of course bias and in hiring practices and all of that. So we've been really looking at this as a way to inform how we, number one, approach our work in looking at systems change, specifically in that arena. And that goes outside of the work that we've done previously around job quality in construction, making sure that we have safe spaces that people want to work. And we found that even though we've identified that for us being able to take away all of the barriers and quote stereotypes around Black and brown workers getting into the field, once those are all removed, we still see disparities in them being hired and promoted. So I'll leave that there for now.
Okay. Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks very much. We're going to get through it. And I just wanted to have a conversation because, I mean, y'all know I can talk to y'all all day long. I'm going to ping to Adrian next. And so Adrian, you want to hop in on this conversation?
Yeah, hi everyone. Adrian Esquivel, Chicagoland Workforce Fund Alliance in Chicagoland. Yeah, just thanks for the opportunity to be here as well. Just building a little bit off of what Jerry's saying. I mean, I think there's like a desire in our field for the labor market to function well and or be functional. And I think what these maps and a lot of the work are showing is that, it's not just kind of skills and training that are going to get folks on a journey towards a quality, equitable pathway or job in that way. And I think that, I was at a shift conference a couple of years ago. I heard someone talking about career pathways, and they had a line that I like to say a lot, which is career pathways are not equitable, nor spontaneous, nor linear. And I just think that that is right on the mark of what we're seeing in this place as well, too. And I think that, there's also the perception sometimes that certain jobs are attainable and also are just kind of good jobs in general without thinking about the investment that went in towards increasing worker power towards making those jobs quality jobs. So there's often a history of occupational segregation in the jobs that are not, and there's a history of organized labor or the threat of organized labor that has created kind of quality jobs as well. So I think that also is a piece that kind of surrounds a lot of this work. And then as far as the journey maps themselves, I think one of the areas that in Chicagoland that it has been and will continue to be useful is to show really like that kind of satisfaction line at the bottom of the maps where it kind of shows that people are having a positive or a negative experience with their journey. Because I think you can start to then look at points of intervention along those pathways as well too. And I think one of the pieces that we have noticed as well that is missing from these maps, and not missing because it wasn't considered, this is a systemic missing, is the lack of quality guidance around helping folks make decisions around their journeys as well too. And that's a real piece for us to intervene on a system-wide level, an opportunity for that as well. So those are just kind of a few initial kind of thoughts, comments, reactions.
Thank you, Adrian. I'm going to ping to Amanda over there in Kansas, get her voice in the conversation. Hey, Amanda.
Hello, thank you. Amanda Duncan with the Workforce Alliance of South Central Kansas. We were eager to participate in this work because it allowed us to explore a new area where we hadn't been able to do the research ourselves or implement these projects. And it was very interesting. And I want to ping off something Michelle said earlier. We as a workforce board have viewed career navigation as a service. We've actually had some of our staff with that job title, career navigators. And this takes it to a whole nother level, bringing in that worker voice and giving us insight into how we can better prepare our staff to serve customers, particularly around things, bringing up some barriers that we hadn't addressed before around mental health and the shift in our economy and the layoffs that occurred in Wichita, the mass layoffs in our aviation industry, and how some of our participants were affected. They were on the older end of that spectrum, and some of the issues that they had been facing. Additionally, maybe to re-enter the space just with their physical limitations, couldn't go back into that production job because they're an older worker and they just physically can't do that work anymore, as well as some of the digital skills that are needed, that digital literacy. We hadn't been asking workers wanting to enter advanced manufacturing, how are your computer skills? And that's something that we've had to, reassess internally, looking at that up front. And so we were just very thankful to be able to participate. And again, as Adrian said, that we're able to do programmatic shifts and look at how we work on the ground, but also strategically with our partners and bringing in new resources or connecting to new people in the community for that, the full collaborative.
I appreciate that. I want to turn to Janelle now. So Janelle and Janelle, so we went to the Bay Area, and one of the things we had this conversation with everybody, but we initially had this conversation with Janelle and her team around understanding gig work and what that looked like in the experience. And so through our multiple conversations, kind of narrowed it down to lifting up the voice of domestic workers, in part because there's a huge movement in California to create safe spaces for domestic workers, and there are, bills that, go to the governor's desk over and over and over again, trying to uplift this. And this is a very active movement. And we thought this would be a great space to kind of lift up nationally what's happening on the ground in the Bay Area. And so we landed with domestic workers. But Janelle, I invite you into the conversation.
Yeah, Janelle Coronado, Associate Initiative Officer at the Rework the Bay. Thank you for inviting me here. And absolutely, to Michelle's point, domestic workers tend to be some of the more unregulated areas, and as far as like workforce protections, wage theft, when we think about worker abuse cases, and just the lack of a quality job experience, that's definitely this area. And I, reflecting afterward upon this research, it really brought home on what happens when we maintain the status quo and how we need to change and adapt practices and to be those workforce advocates for communities in these roles that are often marginalized and often a margin within a margin. As we saw Martha and Bertha in the conversations, had very traumatic stories, and lifting up their experiences goes to show that these gender mappings aren't linear, and just how important it is to think about economic justice when we address these issues, especially around domestic work, and how it uncommonly, and we don't even think about it, that these unseen workers fall often into gig work where it's like they're often unpaid and they go unrecognized. And also, I just want to lift up lastly, before I can keep going, just really noting the language barriers that I reflected on and how language justice is so important. And especially as we think of access to resources and the career betterments, and these women want to be businesswomen of their own.
That was something that came through loud and clear. And I thought, so also for me with the domestic workers, what was really interesting, and we knew this going into the work, that when we talk about occupational segregation, obviously we're talking about mobility, but one of the things we heard over and over again for domestic workers is just the flexibility in the work suits their lifestyle. So in situations where folks want to be in a particular space, I mean, job quality is an issue all around, but it's not just about up the ladder, but if you want to, like in the work that you want to do, the job quality matters as well too. And so we were able to, we heard those stories over and over again. So now that our voices are all on the table, I want to invite some open conversation. I'm going to ping back to Donna because she said she had lots to say, and see like what stands out for you in hearing these conversations or this conversation, Donna.
I think one thing that I'm thinking about kind of in an overarching way is again about this tool and how it allows you to take a critical look at everything from root causes through to the status quo, and you position yourselves to think about how you're going to respond, not only the systems, programs, but even at a more granular level, as everyone has already illustrated and talked about, procedures, and everything else, behaviors. So it's a framework like many others. And I'll say this because I think it's true, though. I don't think it applies here because I think through the stories that you all have told and our understanding of the videos, you've understood the potential of this tool to position you to make decisions, to understand complexity. I just want to say that it's not magic. We're talking about problem-solving frameworks after all, but I applaud the understanding and internalization of what this is and how you've applied it to, again, position yourselves to make decisions about what happens on the ground. I'll just leave it at that. So that would mean that I feel like there's a very sophisticated level of understanding of this tool within the context of HCD and what it can do.
So I think, so one of the things that we talk about, I mean, you know, in doing qualitative research or any type of research, really, once you are in a space, I talk about how our footprints need to be light, right? Because our presence is a type of an intervention, right? And so we're mindful of that. And so I say that because, Kristen, I want to just ping to you for a second, because you talked about the experience for the workers and how it actually propelled them in various ways to move forward. And so I just make that note when talking about research and being on the ground. It's just like there is some intentionality and care that needs to go along with that, because you're entering a space and you want to make sure that no harm is done, right? And so you were really excited about how that has propelled your work forward and how some of this work has been model building, particularly around the incentives that we provide workers, which was, you know, a $500 gift card to have a 90-minute conversation with us and kinds of things. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
I would love to. Thank you. So I think one of the things that we talked a little bit about was the fact that the young voices that came into this space and got the opportunity to talk to Michelle and to other folks from the National Fund, that there was really this sense of psychological safety around those conversations, and to the commentary of like treading lightly in these spaces, because again, these questions are interventions. And so we have a group of young people, honestly, that has been a part of both this journey mapping process, but has then opened the doors to other researchers that have been able to come in, child trends, community wealth partners, other folks that are interested in the voices of these young people. And there's now kind of this culture set up a little bit around kind of a group of like 8 to 10 young people of color in this tech space that knows that when they're called upon to be a part of these conversations, their voices are going to be heard, and they're going to be compensated and respectfully compensated, because we understand that this is not just, you know, their time, but it's their story and their expertise, and we should pay for their expertise. And so part of it's like it's developed this kind of culture around a through line of their engagement. And what has also happened kind of in the granular, I think Don, you mentioned it too. I said, you know, we started to put this information in front of our employers, and sometimes it's the small wins. And so we have this information up, we're utilizing it alongside a tech talent survey that we did with Magic City Data Collective and Tech Birmingham in town, and talking about wage issues for our young people of color in the space. And one of the employers kind of said, hey, I don't understand this wage issue. You know, I don't know anybody paying less than $20 an hour. First of all, like the tech space, it was this kind of realization of like, oh, you had a young person of color, woman, have been a part of these interviews that said, hey, actually, this is what I'm experiencing. And I watched in real time this organic, like, you know, got a professional older man, white man in the tech space and this young woman, and there being this really genuine conversation and him taking that in and going, thank you so much for sharing, like, and for me understanding better. So I think that's been something super powerful on both the big end of going like, we want to do systems change, but also she came up to me afterwards and said, you know, basically I was nervous. He was sitting right next to me, but also I felt like I could because of the information and the power that you've provided me. So that was a really exciting moment for us.
So yeah, it's absolutely the power of worker voice. I mean, I think we heard that a lot. I mean, I think when we were in Chicago, we were talking to the young workers and learners on the ground there. Jubilee comes to mind, but she is a powerhouse worker organizer. But that was brought about through a mentorship that she had in the Chicago area. So I don't know, Adrian, if there's anything that you want to speak to around the worker voice piece and the worker power piece. I know that's a huge part of the work that you're doing in Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're trying to bring together kind of elements of the work so that they're, you know, kind of seen as connected in the sense of like working on career pathway journeys, talking to employers with our sector partnership tables to see, because they themselves often don't, or they're not able to articulate pathways even within their own like hospital systems, as an example. So, you know, I think getting them to work together to start thinking about how those pathways work, but then also tying it to, you know, the real element around what it means to shift the power of workers in this labor market right now. And also, so we're doing that through education, increasing enforcement, through policy change as well, and trying to kind of bring together elements of that into this field of workforce development. Because we kind of view that as critical towards kind of moving people along like an equitable career pathway journey.
So the other thing that strikes me about some of the work, and we have not really lifted this up here, in addition to, I mean, you're talking about doing worker research and what that actually means, doing work in language, in the Bay Area, we had to do relay translation in order to have a conversation with ma'am. Guatemalan workers who spoke ma'am, so an indigenous Guatemalan language, and also and talk about folks who were justice involved or former justice involved, and we actually saw that in Kansas and in Milwaukee. I mean, we saw that I think probably in most of our sites, but being able to engage, Michelle Rafferty made a point earlier, like these are folks who are connected to our collaboratives in some way, shape, or form. There's a whole other population out there that we don't even begin to touch. So can you say more? Is there anything that you want to lift up around what it means to do this and how you guys are engaging on this work on the ground? Does that question make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Happy to go unless Jerry wants to take a dive.
Go for it, Janelle, and then we'll have Jerry.
Yeah, for sure. So just to reiterate the power of bringing in the voices of these workers, and especially having a translator from the translator, as we did, Michelle, in order to speak to the Guatemalan Indigenous mom speaker. It's for me, it was just so powerful, and to think about like the story being told of like the journey of it is to come to a land to seek a better future, and to escape oppression and physical harm as a result, and come here and, you know, having to navigate an environment that was very new. It's language justice in order to hear these stories be told, whether it's in Spanish, Tagalog, Mandarin, or Cantonese. I think it's we lose a sense of community and a spotlight on folks that continue to go unseen, you know, unless we welcome and do the long work of inviting translators and language justice intentional practices into our methodologies and initiatives. And we work at the Bay, we have just did a complete strategic refresh, and not to toot our own horn too much, but thinking about modernizing workforce training programs is one of our new strategies, advancing philanthropy to include these workers and be present in front of them. Our community of practice with our own funder collaboratives are definitely a space that we're integrating, and also thinking about signature policy and building that agenda for Bay Area workers is completely necessary at this point in time, especially as you mentioned earlier, Michelle, these bills keep coming to our governor's desk and our legislative offices and fall flat, and these are just basic protections.
Amanda or Jerry, do you guys want to hop in on this? Or you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, and I thank Janelle for sharing that. One of the things that we're really thinking about is how, as we relates to our processes and practices, is about where we direct our resources and our time when we think about the philanthropy of the work. And so which partners, meaning employer partners, are we really going to dedicate our time and resources to? What does your workforce look like? What are your hiring practices look like? All of this work has informed us in these journey maps. And when it was mentioned that some of our folks, didn't quite know like which way to go, and Adrian alluded to it as well, like there's no clear pathways. What we have found is that we want to work with the firms that are working to hire and promote, and we have and using them as models, and we found that those have been the Black-owned firms. That's where we have the highest percentage of women, women of color and women, as well as men and those that have been justice involved, that are working as project engineers, project managers, and the like in those firms, and they have clear direct pathways. So again, it's about how we've been informed on how we're also focusing our energy, our time, and our financial resources. Because with all of the great training partners that we have, when we can get folks that are doing top-notch work in the training, completing training, and they're ready to go, but the opportunities don't exist, that's also informing how we have these discussions within our network as well.
Correct. I'm going to give the last minute to Amanda. Amanda, do you want to talk about how this work, do you want to say any more about your work that you're doing right now?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to touch on the Peace for Justice involved participants that have come into our program. And there was some apprehension with one individual to even disclose that he had been previously justice involved and had self-selected out of pursuing opportunities because they didn't feel safe or he had experienced discrimination in the past. And so just really trying to reiterate to him and all of our participants that we want to destigmatize that. There's dignity for this work. Maybe we're building for a job, a better job, a career, but really trying to focus on skill sets that might have been earned while they were incarcerated. There's upskilling that's happening there. There's actually some industry that's taking place within the Kansas Department of Corrections. And so it's a highly skilled employee that's coming to an employer, and really letting employers know that, change their mindset, and making sure that those individuals feel safe and supported by our staff, because they're bringing valuable skills to the table and will be, a wonderful employee, and helping boost that confidence and knowing that we're there to support them. So that's very important to us. Because Sedgwick County, about 75% of all people that are released from incarceration in Kansas come to Wichita, even if they have no connection to our community. So that's something that's very important to us.
I remember that gentleman because he happened to make a connection with our videographer. Shout out to Quesa the artist. I don't know if he's on the call, but Quesa is a former justice involved individual, and we found him and thought he would be great for this project, and they connected. So we are at time. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to our rock stars on the call. None of this work would have been possible without you. So deep gratitude for that. So I just want to shout out the final call to action around all of this. Please engage with the work. We have the full video series available to you now, the maps with the discussion guides. We will continue this conversation. Call to action. I think we did a shout out for our Shift conference in September. It'll be in Memphis. It's going to be a blast. You should absolutely join us there. We'll continue this conversation and a whole bunch of other conversations. So join us there in Memphis in September, and reach out to us if you have questions and want to continue the conversation. We'd love to talk to you all. So thank you for your time. Have a fantastic day. Deuces.
Thank you so much.